Emma only wanted to do something special for her husband. It was their 5th wedding anniversary, and she had spent weeks planning the perfect surprise, a rare vintage watch that held deep sentimental value, something she knew would remind him of his late father. She didn't wear designer clothes or flashy jewelry. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there for love. That morning, she walked into one of the most prestigious banks in the city, clutching a worn leather bag and wearing a simple cotton dress. She didn't expect to be greeted with applause, but she certainly didn't expect what came next. Whispers, sneers, cold stares, and finally, open humiliation. They saw a plain woman and assumed the worst. They judged her by her shoes, her bag, the way she didn't fit into their polished, luxurious world. They had no idea who she really was. But all of that was about to change. Because just as she was being escorted out, embarrassed and heartbroken, the bank's glass doors swung open. And when they did, the entire room fell silent. The man who walked in wasn't just anybody. He was the one man they should never have underestimated. This is a story about judgment, about dignity, about how appearances can deceive, and how true power isn't about money. It's about knowing when to stand up and who to stand up for. Emma didn't need a designer dress to prove her worth. She had something far stronger, quiet strength, and the love of someone who saw her value when no one else did. And in just a few minutes, the people who mocked her would come to realize they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. Emma stepped into the grand lobby of the bank, the sound of her footsteps swallowed by the thick marble floors. The chandeliers above sparkled like diamonds, casting soft reflections across polished counters and gleaming glass walls. Everything about this place screamed wealth and exclusivity. She looked out of place, not because she didn't belong, but because she didn't try to blend in. Her dress was simple, made of soft cotton. Her flats were practical, not stylish. In her hands, she carried a weathered leather bag, the kind that had seen years of use, but held something important, a document she needed to deliver that morning. Her posture was upright, her expression calm. She wasn't nervous, but she was clearly focused. All around her, elegantly dressed patrons reclined in velvet chairs. Men in tailored suits, women in heels and designer blouses, sipping complimentary coffee as they waited to be served. Conversations were hushed, refined, until eyes turned toward Emma. 2 women near the premium services desk glanced at her with immediate disapproval. One leaned in to whisper behind a manicured hand, while the other let out a soft smirk. Emma noticed, but said nothing. She kept walking. A staff member in a sharp blazer stepped in front of her, voice polite but clipped. "Can I help you find a regular teller line?" he asked, already gesturing toward a distant corner of the lobby, where long lines and average customers waited behind ropes. Emma didn't flinch. "I need to speak with the branch manager," she said calmly. "It's urgent." The staff member's expression didn't change, but his eyes said everything. He thought she didn't belong here. She felt it in the sideways glances, the forced smiles, the way her presence seemed to ripple across the room like something unwelcome. But Emma didn't back down. She had come for something important, and no amount of luxury or judgment could shake the quiet determination in her heart. Emma remained by the velvet rope that separated regular customers from the premium banking area, her fingers tightening slightly around the strap of her leather bag. She repeated her request, her voice steady but soft. "I need to speak with the branch manager, please." "It won't take long." A nearby security guard took notice. His eyes scanned her up and down, not with concern for her safety, but with suspicion. He shifted his stance, one hand near his radio, the other hovering just close enough to make her feel out of place. His message was clear: you don't belong here. Behind her, a pair of well-dressed women stood near the coffee station, pretending to sip lattes while openly mocking her. One of them tilted her head and whispered loudly enough to be heard. They really should screen who they let in these days. Her friend laughed and replied without even lowering her voice. Maybe she got lost on her way to the discount store across the street. Emma's cheeks burned, but she kept her gaze forward. Her grandmother had taught her that dignity wasn't something you wore on the outside. It was something you held onto when the world tried to strip it away. Moments later, the branch manager arrived. Vivian stepped out from behind a glass door, clipboard in hand and heels clicking confidently against the marble. Her appearance was flawless, hair expertly styled, jewelry tasteful but expensive, and a tailored suit that seemed almost too crisp to bend. Her smile was tight, practiced, but her eyes held no warmth. "I understand you need assistance," she said, her voice sweetened by obligation, not sincerity. "Yes," Emma replied, lifting her chin slightly. "I'd like to make a special purchase. It's for an anniversary." Vivian raised her hand to interrupt, not bothering to hide the impatience behind her smile. "Regular banking services are available at the main counter," she said, gesturing to the crowded area across the lobby. "I'm sure they'll be happy to help you there." Emma didn't move. "I'm here for something that requires access to." Again, Vivian cut her off. This time, her tone sharpened. "Ma'am, let me be clear. Our premium services are reserved for clients with significant portfolios. I'm afraid the jewelry store down the block might be a better fit for your budget." There was no subtlety in her insult. It wasn't just about money. It was about status, appearance, belonging. And in Vivian's eyes, Emma had none of it. More heads turned. A small crowd had begun to gather, their curiosity piqued by the scene unfolding in a place where such confrontations were rare. Emma could feel every stare, every sneer. But she didn't shrink back. She was there for a reason. And she wasn't leaving, at least not yet. Before Emma could respond to Vivian's cutting remark, another woman stepped into the scene. She walked with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed, her high heels clicking sharply on the marble. Rebecca Thornton, vice president of the bank, wore a sleek black suit and an expression of condescension thinly veiled behind a professional smile. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, though the way she looked at Emma made it clear she had already decided there was. Vivian folded her arms and replied with mock patience. "This lady insists on accessing premium services." Rebecca looked Emma up and down, her gaze lingering disapprovingly on her simple dress and worn shoes. "Perhaps we're not communicating clearly," she said, raising her voice so that nearby patrons could hear. "This section is reserved for clients with accounts exceeding 7 figures." Emma opened her mouth to speak, but Rebecca cut her off with a cold, dismissive tone. "Frankly, we have clients waiting who actually belong here. Security can escort you to the appropriate service area." The security guard, as if on cue, stepped forward and reached for Emma's arm. His hand rested on her shoulder, firm and insistent. "Please don't touch me," Emma said quietly, her voice calm but unshaken. Rebecca leaned in, her perfume thick in the air, her voice a venomous whisper. "People like you waste our time every single day. You don't belong here, and it shows. That department store dress, those shoes, you're not fooling anyone." Vivian chuckled under her breath, then muttered, maybe she thought dressing down would help her blend in with the real elite. Rebecca smirked. "They say wealth whispers, but in her case, poverty shouts." Laughter rippled from a few onlookers. The insult stung, but Emma stood her ground. She held her bag tighter, trying to ignore the humiliation washing over her. She felt the heat rising in her face, but she wouldn't cry. Not here, not in front of them. Today was supposed to be beautiful, a surprise for Michael. She had spent weeks coordinating the details, tracking down a rare vintage watch that had once belonged to a collector connected to Michael's late father. It was tucked safely in the bank's exclusive vault, and she had come to arrange the final steps to present it to him that evening. But now, the moment she had imagined, giving him that gift, seeing his eyes light up, was slipping away. Instead of joy, she was standing in the center of a crowded bank, being treated like a trespasser. Her anniversary dream was crumbling right before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it, or so she thought. Just as the security guard began to guide Emma toward the exit, his hand still on her shoulder, the massive glass doors at the front of the bank flew open with a sharp, deliberate swing. The sudden sound cut through the room like a blade. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Laughter died on lips. Heads turned. The morning sunlight poured in behind a tall, commanding figure framed in the doorway. Michael Hartwell. He stood still for a moment, taking in the scene. His charcoal gray suit was perfectly tailored, his expression unreadable but intense. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His presence alone shifted the entire energy in the room. Michael's eyes scanned the lobby slowly. People who had just been smirking now straightened in their seats. The women at the premium services desk lowered their eyes. Vivian stepped back instinctively, smoothing her blazer. Rebecca's confident stance wavered as she realized exactly who had entered the room. With measured steps, Michael began walking forward. Each footfall echoed across the marble, crisp and deliberate. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. The man who now filled the lobby didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. He carried it with him like a second skin. The security guard froze, his hand slipping from Emma's shoulder as if it had been burned. Michael didn't rush. He didn't glare, but the weight of his presence pressed down on every person in the room. And though many didn't recognize Emma just moments ago, they now realized, in stunned silence, that she wasn't just some woman in a cotton dress. She was Michael Hartwell's wife, and everything had just changed. Michael's eyes locked onto the security guard. His voice, calm but laced with authority, carried through the stillness like thunder in a quiet storm. "Remove your hand from my wife." The words didn't need to be loud. They were enough to make the guard step back instantly, his face paling as he realized who he'd just touched. Rebecca's face lost all color. Her mouth opened, but no words came at first. Then she stumbled over her own panic, trying to salvage the situation. "Mr. Hartwell, we didn't realize." Michael turned his gaze on her, cold and unblinking. Clearly, Vivian, now pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, stepped forward with a strained smile. "How we known she was your wife?" "That's the problem, isn't it?" Michael cut her off sharply. "You believe respect is something to be earned only by name or net worth." The silence in the bank deepened. No one dared to interrupt. At that moment, James, the branch president, appeared from his office, clearly rattled. He rushed over. "Michael, I just heard. Are you all right? Is everything okay?" "No, James," Michael replied, his tone colder than the marble beneath their feet. "Everything is far from okay." He turned toward the crowd, then looked back at James. "I just watched your staff humiliate my wife. The same staff who manage portions of my family's financial portfolio. The same staff who laughed at her, judged her, and tried to push her out because she didn't look the part." Rebecca looked down. Vivian stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. "My trust in this institution," Michael said, pausing for just a breath, "is gone." And with those words, the weight of what they'd done finally sank in. Michael's voice lowered, but the edge in it sharpened. He turned fully to James, the branch president, who stood shifting nervously under the weight of what was happening. "Tell me, James," Michael said, each word measured and intentional, "is this how your employees are trained? To judge people by their clothes? To humiliate customers they deem unworthy?" James swallowed hard. His hands fidgeted near the hem of his blazer. I'll need to speak with corporate." "No need," Michael interrupted, his gaze unwavering. "You have a decision to make." Right now, the entire lobby seemed to shrink around them. Employees who had once watched in silence now held their breath. A few board members who had arrived for a meeting moments earlier stood near the back, whispering nervously among themselves. Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough for James to hear clearly, but firmly enough that everyone nearby still caught the message. "Either you prove that you do not tolerate this kind of behavior," he said, "or you send a message that you do. And if you choose wrong, James, your name will be the one attached to it." The air tightened. Rebecca looked to James, panic rising in her eyes. Vivian's lips parted, as if to protest, but she said nothing. James finally spoke, voice thin and trembling. "Rebecca, Vivian, you're dismissed. Effective immediately." The words hit harder than any shout. Rebecca gasped, stunned. "You can't do this." But James didn't even look at her. "Clean out your desks." Vivian turned desperately to Michael. "Mr. Hartwell, please, you have to understand." But Michael didn't respond. He didn't need to. The decision had been made. The very power Rebecca and Vivian had used to belittle others had vanished in an instant, stripped away without so much as a raised voice. Their fall wasn't loud, it was silent, and that made it all the more devastating. Michael turned to Emma, his expression softening as he reached for her hand. Without saying a word, she took it. Together, they walked past the stunned employees, past the stunned crowd, and through the same towering glass doors that had once welcomed judgment and whispers. Emma didn't look back. She didn't need to. The silence behind them was louder than any apology. The people who had laughed at her now stood frozen, not out of fear, but out of realization. She could have smirked. She could have said something clever. But that wasn't who she was. She had never come for revenge. All she wanted was to be treated with respect. And now, the same people who saw her as invisible had witnessed exactly who she was, a woman who didn't need wealth to prove her worth. As they stepped into the crisp autumn air, Emma exhaled deeply. It was the kind of breath that released everything: shame, hurt, disappointment. She felt light again. The moment was over, but something inside her had changed. She had stood her ground. She had endured humiliation with grace. And in the end, her quiet strength had spoken louder than any accusation. Because dignity, once tested, either breaks or becomes unshakable. And Emma? She had never been stronger. Weeks later, the story hadn't been forgotten. It had, in fact, taken on a life of its own. An article began circulating online, titled "The Power of Respect: A Billionaire's Lesson on Dignity." It chronicled the events of that unforgettable morning at the bank, not as a scandal, but as a turning point. The piece didn't focus on Michael's wealth or Emma's humiliation, but on what their actions revealed about human nature, class bias, and the quiet strength of those who are so often underestimated. Conversations erupted across social media. People shared their own stories, times they'd been judged for how they looked, where they came from, or what they wore. News outlets picked up the story. Financial institutions faced scrutiny over how they treated clients who didn't look the part. What happened at that bank had sparked something bigger. As for Rebecca, her downfall came swiftly. The elite social circles she once moved through with ease suddenly turned cold. Invitations stopped arriving. Corporate headhunters stopped calling. The same people who used to praise her professionalism now whispered about her cruelty. No amount of designer suits or expensive perfumes could erase what the world had seen. Vivian's path took a different turn. She didn't try to hold on to her former status. Maybe it was the look in Michael's eyes that day, or the silence that followed her dismissal. Whatever it was, something in her shifted. She quietly stepped away from the corporate world and took a position at a small, local credit union, far from marble floors and glass walls. For the first time, she listened, really listened. She greeted customers by name. She no longer looked at shoes or bags or titles. She looked at people, and in doing so, she began to rediscover something she hadn't felt in years: humility. The story had started with judgment, but it ended with change. And for many, it became more than just a headline. It became a reminder that respect isn't something reserved for the wealthy. It's something every human being deserves. That evening, Emma stood by the window of their penthouse apartment, high above the city streets. The skyline shimmered with lights, each one a flicker of life below. But her thoughts were somewhere else, back in that marble-floored bank, back in that moment when the world tried to tell her who she was. Only now, the world knew better. She was no longer just Michael Hartwell's wife in the eyes of the public. She was Emma, the woman who stood her ground with grace, who didn't shout or fight back with anger, but whose silence spoke louder than any accusation. A woman who reminded people that true power isn't loud, flashy, or worn on your wrist. It lives in how you carry yourself when others try to bring you down. It lives in your ability to walk away with your head held high, knowing exactly who you are. As she looked out at the city below, Emma smiled softly to herself. Not because she had won anything, but because she had never needed to. Respect, she realized, isn't something you demand. It's something you carry within you, quietly, confidently, and without apology. Have you ever walked into a room and felt eyes on you? Not because of who you were, but because of what you were wearing, how you looked, or where you came from. Have you ever been dismissed, overlooked, or judged before you even had the chance to speak? What did you do? Did you confront it? Did you rise above it? Or did you, like Emma, hold on to your dignity and let your quiet strength speak for itself? I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. You never know. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Because the truth is, real power has nothing to do with bank accounts or brand names. It's not in titles or status. Real power is standing up for the people we love. Real power is knowing your worth, even when others can't see it yet. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply not back down. Thank you for being part of this community. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories that matter. And remember, no one else gets to define your value. You do.